You can all hear me fine? That's cool. All right, my name's Elliott Kember. That's me. I wear hats. And I do rum and code, which is me. And I changed my talk because I was going to talk about like Node and Mongo and WebSockets and all of that stuff, but I realized that was bullshit, and I wanted to talk about something else. So if you imagine this as red, it's actually 3D, so you're only getting the left eye. So a while back, my buddy Alex McCaw, this guy, who now works at Twitter, he made Spine.js. It's a web framework, JavaScript MVC web framework. And he was telling me, right, let's do asynchronous stuff. We should do asynchronous UI, right? He was like, asynchronous UI this, asynchronous UI that, you know, web apps that don't rely on the server. And he could have been a fucking space alien from Mars for all the stuff he was telling me. I was like, I don't want to do that, that's hard. Like, there's a lot of things you have to do, and there's callbacks. You know, you're writing jQuery, and your code blossoms out into like a bajillion lines, and you're like, I don't like this. I don't like this at all. And so, has anybody done, by the way, has anybody done any like really rich jQuery apps or anything really fancy or anything like that? Just raise your hands. Just anybody? Anybody? I just wanted to use it. He's green. Okay, so this is your canonical example of your asynchronous app. And I saw this, and he showed me this. He was like, look at how amazing it is. You can do it in like X lines. I was like, it's great, but you know, it's really like, that's your example app. It's really shit. It's really boring. And it does nothing, and it makes you green. So, but I persevered with it, okay? I persevered with it. I was like, right, let's check this out. So I looked at the source code, and actually, once you start reading the source code, and once you figure out what they're trying to do and stuff like this, it's really cool. It's really crazy. It's like the possibilities start to become sort of obvious to you. So I drank the Kool-Aid. I drank lime Kool-Aid, apparently. Can we fix that? Can we get the color, the hue? Okay. So I drank the Kool-Aid, right? I was like, let's give this a shot, because, you know, how bad could it be? So first of all, what is it? Has anybody used Backbone in anger? Heaps of you, that's fantastic. For the ones that don't, this is going to help you a lot. For the ones that do, all of my mistakes, just come and point them out later and buy me a beer or something. But it's an MVC JavaScript framework. It's no input. It's an MVC JavaScript framework. It uses underscore.js, can use jQuery or Zepto, and it's about 5.6K, so it's tiny, which is fantastic. Why are we using it? It's quick. It's very quick. And it's quick to build things, which is the other part of this, which is the development side of this. Not only that, it's quick to build nice things, and quick to build nice things well. And all of these things are really, really important. Like, all of these things are really important for us. Now, who's using it? Okay, I want you guys to help me here, because I won't be able to see these, but see if you can tell me who these people are. Just shout them out as they come up. Who's that? Stripe, sure. What else? Basecamp Mobile, right. Groupon. This one always gets me. Posterous, yeah, nice one. Foursquare. Flow, MidLab. LinkedIn Mobile. SoundCloud, those guys are here. And CloudApp. CloudApp actually use it for their panel. It's pretty much like heaps of people using it. I just added one more, I think. Where did it go? Airbnb. Maybe it was Airbnb. Can't see it. No one. It's more like, in this case, it's more like, oh shit, I went too far. It's more like who's not using it, right? You can do so much stuff with this. It's really, really good for web mobile apps, because you can, a lot of evented stuff. We built something a while back for Instagram, and they gave us, you know, a very small fraction of their $1 billion for it. A very small fraction being nothing. We built a browsing framework, a browsing site for Instagram. And we wanted to make something that was weird, right? We wanted to make something that really reflected how Instagram worked and how cool it was to just browse photos. And there were lots of people making apps for this, making web services, and they all kind of sucked, because they were all like, oh, we'll make a request and bring some things in, and then you make another request and clear everything and bring some things in. And we're thinking, that's gross. That's really weird. Why are we still doing this? Why don't we just create something brand new? And we wanted to make something like this, right? We wanted to make a browser that we could just like fire through all the images and like look at each one and like them and follow them and favorite them and the rest of it. So I started off writing this in just straight up jQuery, and it was nasty. Like, man, it was bad. It's okay to get one thing going, but as soon as you start to do other stuff, your code just suddenly is 5 times as big. It's crazy. It's just really difficult. I think I'm searching for kittens here. This is all Instagram is, by the way, if you haven't used it. It's all kittens. $1 billion worth of kittens. So yeah, this is great, because each one of these views is bound to a model, and you can do actions on that model. Liked it, yeah, there we go. It's not a kitten. So here's some code. Don't look too closely because it's old code, and this code and this thing for me, I was like, this is terrifying. Right? This is really scary. I don't want to write this shit. This is scary. This is all browser side stuff. But I figured, you know, I can probably give it a shot. And like there are Ruby developers, and there are a lot of Ruby developers saying, you know, I can't do that. It's front end stuff. I don't want to do that. But I kind of want to say, like, the main point of my talk is if this guy can do it, if this guy can do it, you can do it. Because it's not hard, you just need to practice. And then I realized that this is my own presentation, and that's not a flattering photo. So I replaced it with this photo, which I think is better. I think I'm programming. Yeah, that's programming. Okay, cool. So the other thing about Backbone is it's a desert, right? It's the Wild West. Everybody's doing different things in different ways. There's no perfect way to do everything, and that's why Backbone is pretty decoupled. There's a bunch of things that do stuff, and you can use them in the ways that, you know, make stuff work for you. There's no sort of strict way of doing it, which is weird for a Rails developer, right? There's supposed to be like 3 points, and there's supposed to be a 7-step tutorial on how to get everything running. It's kind of not like that. You can use whichever bits you want. So the best part about Backbone for me, and learning this stuff in any MVC framework, you can just, you know, replace, when I say Backbone, replace any MVC framework, is in traditional Rails stuff, you go like this, right? You've got a model, and you've got a view, and you get horrible HTML that comes out and goes onto the person's computer. And every time you want new stuff, you go back to their server and you say, hey, I need new stuff. Can you give me new stuff? Which is ridiculous, like, which is really, really bad. And then you mess around in this bit with like some jQuery that, you know, slides things up and down, and you're like, that's not nice. This is 2012, and that's bullshit. So Backbone kind of turns it on its head and says, right, our horrible HTML, forget it. Like, we're not going to rely on the DOM. We're going to rely on the DOM as little as we can. It's going to watch our views, and they're going to watch our models, and everything's going to work nicely based on triggers and events, things like that. So yeah, this shit is great. Right? This shit is much nicer way of doing things. So if we look at our example app, our to-dos app, we can see that, you know, you can kind of figure out what the models would be if you put them in a Rails app. You know, you've got a to-do list, but here we've also got many to-dos, and this is the idea of Backbone's collection. We have like an array of stuff, and you can call methods on these sort of collections and filter things and map things and use crazy underscore stuff to mess with it. And here's the source code. They did this amazing, like, documented source code that you can go through and read. It's in JavaScript, whereas most of my examples are in CoffeeScript, because CoffeeScript is much nicer, as you will know from Sebastian's talk earlier. And so yeah, as we can see, we've got a to-do list and many to-dos, and they kind of work together like that. You initialize them all, you instantiate these things. Everything's done on document.ready at the top. This is all jQuery stuff, and it's pretty simple. Like, there's not a lot there, and that's why this is sweet. This is really cool. So our views, we've got some app views. This is the app view, right? This is the main thing that runs your app. And you're thinking, like, where's the controller? I don't know, like, is it a controller? But it's not. I mean, you don't have controllers like you do in Rails. There's no, there's no thing that basically organizes everything. You've got your router, or as we in England apparently say, router. And that sort of organizes requests, but really you just have this one overarching view that handles everything, which is kind of weird. But if you think about it, you're displaying a whole lot of stuff in a view on the page. And it's all a great big template, and stuff goes inside it. And that's why this kind of makes sense. So there's your element, there's your to-do app, and you instantiate it, you create a new one, and that's how we get started, right? That's our thing. You've got your set element. Now, set element is an interesting one, so instead of setting it on initialize, you can actually call that method, which brings all the events that were bound to your element before, if it had one, and puts them on this element, which is nice. And then you've got your render method, which is like, there's a whole lot of stuff going on here. But it all kind of makes sense. It all looks like Ruby, which helps. And yeah, you basically, this is the interesting thing here, because we kind of don't know what that is, because I didn't include that in my screenshot. So if we check it out, it's underscore.template. Now, underscore.template, if you don't know it, is a function in underscore that takes block in code and puts it all together using JavaScript and brings it out as HTML. And then you can put variables into it. This is a function, it turns out. This thing on the right here is a function, and you can call it with parameters. So if you look more into underscore, you're like, holy shit, there's heaps of stuff here for doing awesome things. Like, Like throttling, you can tell it to only call a method, only call a function every 100 milliseconds or every second, so you don't just keep calling it the whole time if it doesn't need to. You've got array methods and hash methods and binding events and templates. And templates is what we're using. So underscore is choice, we like underscore. So these are our template dealies here. Pretty straightforward, it's like using herb. You can do loops in it, you can pass in arrays and things. And this guy down here, this fella down here will escape our output. So we get, when little Bobby Tables comes along and he's like, what's up? Well, actually, this wouldn't escape that. But when little Bobby script tag comes along and he's like, we're going to alert something, it doesn't let you do it, which is really useful. And I always forget to put them in. I think everybody does sometimes. And your templates kind of look like this, and the script type equals text/template. And this is actually a really bad example because they've got div class equals to do. Now this is a bad example because every view has an element and you're supposed to use that element. And if you put stuff inside that element that is sort of supposed to be that element, it's kind of weird, it's kind of messy. This actually goes in an li, so it's an interesting example, and I wouldn't do it that way, but it's Backbone, you can do it whatever way you want. And you've got your events. What's going to happen when we click stuff? What's going to happen when we change stuff? What's going to happen when we press keys and things? And each event is references a function in that object, and it'll do that stuff when you run that event, and it gets the event through, and you can mess with it from there. And this is a really, really nice way of doing things. This is a much better way of doing things than like binding all of your events separately and at different times. You just have one set of events, and you can delegate events, and it's yeah, it's magic, right? It does all the stuff for you that you would otherwise have to write all this horrible JavaScript. So if we've got a really simple one, we click it. I think that works. Click it. You just click the element. You get an alert. That's horrible. We hate alerts, don't we? They're awful. It's blocking UI in a non-blocking app. So like I was saying before, in a view you've got an element, and that kind of looks weird actually because you've got $L. And you're kind of thinking like at $. The $. Is just a cached jQuery wrapper around that element, and the @ is this dot, and that's how CoffeeScript works, which I think Sebastian touched on. So each view has an element that it renders out, and so in your render method, you're messing with this $L, this element. All of these things, I think, are equivalent. Yeah. So it's just a really nice way of writing this stuff. All this is doing is taking your code and making it much shorter. You can also do selectors. There is a change to this recently in the changelog that you see, where it doesn't do it the way you expect with like the $ and then the selector and then the element, because that can be HTML. It doesn't really work, but these two are the same. So that element, when you create the view, you get a few things with it. You get a tag name, which is the tag for the element. So this one's a div. It could be an li. It could be whatever. This one, I think this came from one of our apps. But you probably wouldn't put ID in there in case, unless it was the main one, because you might have 100 of these, and 100 of the same ID is bad. And we can bind to it. This is the nicest bit. This is a bit I love, because you don't have to tell your model doesn't have to do anything about this stuff. It just updates its things. And model.onChange, and you call render on the view. So every view that is bound to a model will update when you change your attributes. So when you update it live from the server, when you push it using pusher, when you do a JSON pull, any stuff like this will trigger these events and will update the object, and this model is going to change. And then this view is going to see that change and be like, right, what's up? Let's change. And this makes asynchronous dog happy. So we can represent these objects using HTML that is ephemeral, right? It just goes away. You can change it, and it's a representational of like what you're using, rather than having to go back and find it and then update it with more data, and then use horrible JavaScript to change everything, and then it breaks in IE, and you're like, oh, this is the worst thing ever. This is a much nicer way of doing it. And you can also trigger these like as and when you want. So you can have your own events, you can do stuff, and you can semicolon namespace, I think is the way to do these. And you can send a message. So when you trigger an event, you can pass a variable through it. Or I think pass a string is the idea. So yeah, you can do this on a collection as well. So if the collection changes, you just run a certain function. And this is awesome because we can have like different render functions. We can have one that renders the whole thing, and that's weird because images like reload and stuff, and that sucks. You can have one that just renders the invitations, which is something that I'm using. So you can render certain parts depending on like which attribute of your object has changed. And if that attribute is an object, you can bind things onto that as well, which is nice. It's a nice way of doing stuff. It's just so much nicer than doing this all in the server side. So your router is basically the thing that it's routes.rb, right? But in JavaScript. And so it's all pretty straightforward. You've got your URLs, and now Backbone uses push state. And if your browser doesn't support push state because it sucks, it'll fall back to hash. I think it's just hash. It's not hash slash or hash bang or anything like that. It's just hash. And this is really, really nice because you can change your URLs and hit enter and they update. It takes you somewhere else. It's cool. So for example, in Instagrate, which I showed you earlier, we've got like /by/:user/ID. And you've got like on and then a date and then a photo. So you can always track where you are contextually on the page using your URL, which is awesome because then if you come back later or you refresh the page, you're exactly where you were. And you can even do stuff like putting context. So in Instagrate, where we had multiple carousels going side to side, you could probably put those in the URL as well, but we didn't because we're lazy. So this is nice. And this bullshit comment code I'm going to take out. It's actually you do stuff with your app view. Or whatever you want. I would do it with the app view. And after your document is loaded, after DOM's ready, your Backbone history start. So that manages your back button and forward button stuff. It does your push state for you. This is really, really nice. But you have to do it after document start because there's a reason I can't remember what it is. So what about Rails? Like how do we do this stuff in Rails? One thing that's important to remember about Rails is you're thinking, right, okay, I'm just going to make static HTML and put it on S3 and people are going to load it up and it's going to go and get JSON from the server and just render it, which is not a bad way of doing things. You can definitely do it that way. But what's really nice and what's recommended is to push data into your objects when you first start. First time you load the page, it should get all the stuff from the database and render it out with the layout code and with the JavaScript code and with all the stuff, because that means that when the app loads, it doesn't have to go like loading. There's nothing worse than loading a web page and being like, all right, I've got this web page now, and it's like a loading spinner. You're like, well, it's finished loading, I thought, and then it's loading more data, and you get nothing until then. So this is a really important way of doing it. You can do it that way and bind it to the window, and you can do that after all your scripts are loaded. You can do it after the DOM is loaded. I've done both ways, and both ways seem to work just fine. There are advantages to doing it this way because you can assume that the DOM is always ready when you start, so anytime you initialize an object, you can run jQuery calls and things. But if you do it the other way, everything has to have loaded. Obviously, I'm back to writing JavaScript, and I'm in bad habits, so we have to add semicolons. In actual fact, if we really wanted to do this properly, I'm told this is the way to do it. And we discovered last night that the best way to write JavaScript code is like this. And this code is MISLAB approved. So that's what all your templates should look like, really. Just a sea of semicolons. This one too, and one thing I forget about Rails, or was I had to look up, was that if you want to get triangle bracket percentage, you've got to do triangle bracket percentage, because that means it doesn't actually run through herb. It's gonna come out as that in HTML, and that's what you want. You want your HTML to look like that, and your herb template to look like that, because this way, when JavaScript loads this as a text template, it's gonna know, and it's not gonna do it before in the render in herb. Which is cool. The way that we do this stuff is just to have all the templates in one page. You can do it with different templates in different files as well, and that's a good way to do it. Yeah, we just put them all in a partial and just load up the partial. And as the project got bigger and bigger, we added more and more to this giant page of partials. And I think it's like 200 lines long now. So you put your assets in your asset pipeline, and you split them up into views and collections and models and routers, and you just put them in folders. It's like in a Rails app. You've got app/controllers. Same deal, same naming convention, .js.coffee, and you're all good. Use document.load, or just load them in order. That's what I've been doing now, because I assume it's going to be faster. I'm not actually sure. I haven't benchmarked it, and I should. Someone's going to tell me later that's wrong. Bind everything to the window if you suck like me. It's fine. And yeah, store everything in data.html.erb. That's how we're doing it. You kind of want to just bind one thing to the window, but it's your app. so you can assume that you're not going to be doing anything else, so you can pollute your namespace if you like. Someone's going to kill me later. I'm basically trying to get someone in the audience to just go, "That's wrong," and like yell out. But no one's doing that, so that's fine. Either you're shy or I'm right. We've already had that one. I copy and pasted a lot of my slides. So this is something I've been building. I built this to-do app ages ago, and it was all synchronous and it sucked. It's called Speckle. And the idea behind it, and the only idea behind it that makes it different from everything else, is you've got multiple checkboxes per item. And I was like, okay, well, let's build that. And it was synchronous, right? Everything waited around. So it was like you check something and it had to load the entire thing back, and it came back from the server. This is 2012. We don't have to build stuff like that. So the data structure looks like everything else. The project has many lists, as many items, as many users, as many blah, blah, blah. You can see how it would work. And I can actually probably give you a demo. So here we go. Here's now this will probably go wrong, won't it? But this is the app. This is the app if you have one project that's called Railsberry. We've got the router set up, so if we go back to the home, there's Mislav again. We go back to the home page. So we click on our project, and we want to add a list. Things to do to Mislav at Railsberry. Oops. Cool. Make Mislav up here. Good. Make Mislav pay for HTML. Good. Throw Mislav in the fistula. Whoops. Content editable. Run on. But what's cool about this is it's so quick to add stuff. It's so quick to add things. Like yesterday I was just dicking around with JavaScript, and I just added something like this, where you can go, you just change it so this is one. And I love writing code like this. Doing this in the previous way of doing stuff would have been fucking lines of code. It would have been hundreds of lines of code. It would have been horrible. But you can just add something that accesses all your models. It's like going from procedural code to Rails code. And I think this stuff is really, really, really important. I think it's really important to be writing code in this way, and not stupid code where you just render out HTML and then mess with it with JavaScript functions everywhere, or write your own framework or something. Because this stuff is really important, and it's important for perceived speed. And perceived speed is the most important thing. I'll come to that in a minute. But this is the backbone.js documentation page, and it has everything in one page, and it's really good just to read. Because you go back and you see stuff, and you're like, I'm doing that completely wrong. I should have done it the different way, because I didn't read the documentation in the first place. So, in short, and to sum up, in a quick summary, the really, really important thing about Backbone and about why I wanted to talk to you about this instead of all this Node.js stuff is this is changing, and this is new. Like, it's not new, because this paradigm goes around in circles, right? Thin client, thick client, fast connection, slow connection, all this stuff. But we need to change the way that we're doing websites, I think. And it's like my friend Alex was saying, asynchronous UI, asynchronous UI. He's right, and I agree with him now, because it's 2012, and we're still requesting every single page from a server that's 100 miles away. So if you have a 4-page website, and I come to your website and have you the first page, and I want to see the second page, I shouldn't have to go all the way back to your server to render the second one. And that's silly. If you think about it, that's silly. You've got these fast browsers now, and these fast computers, and these fast clients, and native is doing it, so why can't we? Right? This is how it should be done. You should have more power on the client, I think. We should move in this direction. And it's really important to think about this stuff new, to come at it from a new point of view, because this is an old technology now. This has been around for a while, and people have been using it the same way, and it does all the same stuff. But internet speeds are going up. Browser speed and support is improving and increasing, and it's a fantastic time to be doing this stuff. And we've got to kind of stop and think, why are we doing this in such a bad way? Why are we rendering out these pages all separately? Why isn't more stuff being done in the browser? Because all we are doing in anything that we do is putting pixels on screens, and getting people to click things, and getting their opinion on stuff, and getting data from them. And if you remember that and forget everything else, that's the most important thing to remember. It doesn't matter how you do it. What's important is to do it the best way. And doing every page separately and having all of these things as separate assets and everything is not the best way to do this stuff. It's not the nicest way. This is a better way to do it. We'll do it on the client. Right? This makes sense. iOS has so much power and so much native processing, and everything is so quick. And we want that. We want that in HTML. If we're ever going to keep up with the stuff, we've got to do that in HTML as well. We've got to be able to render stuff, using the power of the browser rather than just giving it straight HTML because we can now, because we've got data. Are there any questions next up? Does anybody have any questions on Backbone or on any of this stuff or serving Backbone with Rails? One right there. Just shout if you have to.
What about SEO? I did a couple of apps in Backbone, and one of the problems was, hey, there's this thing called Google, and you index your page, and it needs to be able to traverse it, and people need to be able to share links and things like that.
Right.
What kind of issues with Backbone would you consider with that?
The question was about SEO, and it's a totally valid question. And using Backbone for your app makes it pretty SEO unfriendly. Like, you've got no content on your page when Google scrapes the HTML. It's empty, like there's nothing in there. There's no content, there's no data, there's no headers and footers, there's no nothing. I don't know what the answer is, to be honest. There's probably a few ways of doing it. You can fake data for the Googlebot if you want. But really, I think this is a problem. And I don't know if it's one that we can solve to serve things to Google. I don't know. Maybe Google has to update the way that it does its searching to actually, render out the page in full. I don't know if someone can give me better information on whether they actually will do that. But it's kind of a thing where they're expecting the HTML to show all this data. And we're saying, well, that's not really the best way of doing it. We're going to do it this other way. And my hope is that if we keep doing it this way and we change everything, people like Google are going to have to say, well, this isn't working. Like, we have to change the way that we do search engine stuff. Like, we have to change the way we crawl. We have to render stuff first and then look. Because I think it kind of makes more sense. I don't know if that doesn't answer your question or anything, but it is a problem. It is a problem. So if you are doing SEO stuff and you need a front-end page or one page, my advice is for things like the apps that I'm doing where they're Backbone heavy, you have a public marketing site that's all HTML. It's just straight up HTML. And that's the page that everybody hits. And search engine can render it and can read all the HTML and stuff. And then your actual application becomes the actual the Backbone app. Right? So you have a static HTML public end, and once you're logged in, everything's in Backbone. That's one way of doing it. But yeah, long term, I don't know. Next question.
As far as I know, Google can execute JavaScript.
They can, or they
yes,
do?
they can, and they're doing it.
And they do.
Yeah, as far as I know.
Cool. Okay, great. Well, there's your answer. They're executing it, and they must be crawling it, which is good. Which I think means that they're reacting to people using JavaScript to mess with the content of the page, which I think is important because people are browsing with JavaScript disabled, and there are some valid reasons to do that, and there are some reasons where it's just like, I don't like JavaScript. But if you're doing that, my opinion on this, and it's one that people hate, is that you should probably turn off CSS as well, because that's unnecessary. And I would just turn off HTML altogether because if you're going to mess with the way that I'm going to display an application to you, it's kind of like subverting what I'm trying to do. And this is why I disagree with the rendering engine thing, where like WebKit and Firefox render things differently. And I don't think that's right, because if I'm designing something, if I'm developing something, and I want it to work in a certain way, that's the way I want you to use it. And that's exactly the way that I've planned for. And if you're going to use it differently, it's going to suck, or it might be unpredictable. And you have this fragmentation that makes your thing like suck when people use it. And that's the worst thing in the world. You're messing with what I'm trying to do? That's terrible. I don't like that. It's an opinion, and I think it's an underrepresented one, because everyone's like, I should run an every rendering agent. But that's my point of view.
Do you test your your Backbone code?
I can't tell who was asking. Over there. Right?
Yeah, I am asking here. Here.
Oh, hey. How's it going?
Hi. Do you test your Backbone code? Because it's particularly difficult to test views part. So we solved that problem by introducing the other layer, like controller, that sits between view and model, and test the logic in the controller and leave the view just to render things. But I'm interested in if you have any ideas of how to tackle that.
Yeah, testing the stuff is a funny one. And you can test it programmatically, and that's one of the ways of doing it. That's a good one. But the way that I have tested things in the past with the JavaScript applications is either have a set of functions that just basically mimics user input and checks for things. Like it's a functional test, I guess. And you just run the stuff and you check the output and you make sure that everything works in the expected way. It's weird because it's UI testing, right? So You kind of need something like Selenium to actually run through and click the buttons to make sure that all the important stuff is working. The logic stuff, yeah, you can test that. It's fine. Like you can test stuff in exactly the same way, I think, as testing Rails code. But the actual there's something ringing. The actual interaction stuff, I think the best way to test that stuff is to really use it, because as soon as you're writing tests for like UI clicking stuff and moving around, what you're doing is like solidifying your experience of this thing. And the way that I've found for this stuff is you change it. Like you change it all the time. You think this doesn't work right, and you change it, and then you got to change all your tests. But you're always doing that. And the UI kind of evolves and adapts. Once you've nailed it down, and the way that I do it is just step through a list of actions and execute clicks and things like that on the elements and basically see what the output is. It's not the best way, but it works.
Cool.
We are also using Backbone, and it's quite easy to use mainly because it's easy to extend. For example, so Backbone is quite easy to extend, mainly if you, for example, you want to override like the parse method when you fetch data and so on. But overall, is Backbone an MVC framework? Because it doesn't, I mean, well, where is the controller? Or is it more like an MVVM, model view model? Because, again, your model is not actually a model, it's a model for the view. And then you have the view model.
Yeah, now this is a question I'm probably going to struggle with. The question was like, is Backbone MVC? And there's a lot of differing opinions on this, and I think that like, it's technically not. Like it doesn't map to a controller, and I don't know whether like it should. Like I don't know whether that paradigm has to exist in all user and stuff. I mean, you can have a view that works as your controller in a sense, but it also has a template, and that your view is essentially your controller because it's your one overriding template, and that handles all of your stuff.
Exactly. We feel the same way, and MVC, I think that is a buzzword.
Buzzword, yeah.
Yeah. So if you want to sell Backbone, it's an MVC framework.
Yeah, it's much easier to tell people about it if you say it's MVC,
Exactly.
basically. Maybe it's not, and maybe it shouldn't be, and maybe MVC is not the be-all and end-all concept for this stuff. Maybe you can do it in other ways, but yeah, people are like, oh, it doesn't have controllers. And that wigged me out when I was coming from Rails, because I was like, how do I manage these requests? And there's a router, and then there's views. And I don't know what goes in the middle. But yeah, I reckon it's just one big view. Your controller is your app view, right?
And one final question. Do you use any other frameworks, on top of Backbone, like Marionette and so on?
I don't, but I've looked at a couple, and it's a really, really good idea. Marcin has done one called Agility that they're using, and that's it's clever because Backbone is not a framework like Rails is a framework, right? It's not like it's a framework for building frameworks on top of, I think.
Exactly. It's more like a library.
Yeah, it's more like a library. It's loosely decoupled stuff, which I usually hate. Because it's like, it's all wishy-washy, and you can include whatever you want. I'm like, no, I want to build my application, and I want to do all these things, and I want to make it work. I don't want to have to, think about what I'm including, which is a taste thing, total preference thing. But yeah, it's gonna be really interesting to know where this stuff goes. And Backbone, one of the things about Backbone is it's quite, it's not really opinionated on what libraries you use. So if you want to do some certain stuff like relational, right? Relational is Backbone sort of doesn't really do it. It doesn't even touch it. It's like, no, we're not going to provide that. You can extend Backbone, and there's a thing called Backbone Relational that does it really well, or reasonably well. So it's not as opinionated as something like Rails about how you're supposed to do this stuff. So frameworks on top of it, I think, are a really good idea, and I'm really looking forward to figuring out which is the best one. But I think it's too soon.
It's not so opinionated like Ember.js.
Yeah, Ember is a lot more opinionated. And I don't think Yehuda's is here, but it's. I think that's a good thing. I think it's a good thing the way Rails is opinionated. So maybe Ember.js is the way to go. I don't know. I haven't really checked it out enough to make a decision, but yeah, it's going to be interesting to see. If someone builds like a really opinionated framework on top of Backbone, that'd be really nice, and I'd use that. That'd be really nice. Sorry? Chaplin. I don't get why. Why?
It's a framework that you try.
Oh, it's called Chaplin. Oh, there is one. Okay, fine. Okay, Chaplin. All right, we should check that out. It's probably 100. Anybody else got a question? I don't actually know how much time I got left. Yep. Hmm?
Yeah, you have some time. Yeah.
There's one there, I think.
Hi.
Hey, how's it going?
I totally agree with you that in future we will have a lot of more the code will move into the client more, rich client or something like that. Um, what's your approach to handle the database stuff, like stateful data, to push that on the client and getting back and things like that, synchronizing?
It's tricky. Synchronizing data between two sources is always a total pain point. I don't know what my view is. I don't think. I think you change state, and you change your objects, and you change everything on the client, and then you marshal it and you send it, and you save it somewhere and you bring it back down again. I don't know what the answer is to that. Maybe WebSockets are the answer where every single change is persistent, but God, I don't know. And it's really hard to say. I look at it like any application that you load on a computer that's an actual, Mac app. Say Photoshop, for example. It's got a loading screen, right? And that's loading stuff from disk to memory. And that's loading the application from disk to memory. And for me, there is a similarity between that and loading an application from the internet to memory. So in this hypothetical situation where your internet is fast enough to load 700 megabytes in 2 seconds, maybe some of you got such a connection, I don't. But in theory, like you could pull down the entire Photoshop each time and just and run it. And so you wouldn't actually have the application locally. Or you download Delta updates to what you already have. And this isn't kind of answering your question, it's sort of in a roundabout way, but I think about these just like they're Mac apps, like they're any kind of app. And so I think to myself, like, what do applications do? And traditionally, they save stuff once in a while. New Mac apps are saving stuff all the time, so you've got so you can open them, you can quit them and restore them, and everything's the way it was. And I think it's kind of the same. You can save stuff in local storage and then persist it away to the server, and that can work really nicely. But then again, you're doing all that syncing stuff. So I don't know. I don't know what the answer is. Maybe someone's got an answer. If you've got an answer to that one, put your hand up. But I don't think there's any one way that's going to work the best for this. It's like with Backbone. There's 1,000 different ways to do everything.
I still have time.
Any more questions?
Do you have any, say that you have an existing Rails application,
yeah,
and you have one particular page which is quite dynamic, and it has some horrible jQuery JavaScript on it right now.
I've got applications like that,
yeah. And do you have any thoughts on how you would go about switching that page to use Backbone? Are there any particular gotchas with having one page using Backbone whilst other parts of the app doesn't?
My advice to you is burn it all to the ground and rebuild it completely. Delete your code, right, perfect. That ties in with the Elliott talk, delete it.
Did you get that thing? Yeah.
Just delete it, man, just delete it, just do it again. Don't try and like rescue all of your stuff, take little bits out, but rethink it, like totally rethink it. Do it on the client, but totally rethink it. And rethink the way that you're serving that page, because the way that you've gotten to that, the way it is now, is not the right way to go about things. You've hacked it together with 1,000 jQuery functions, it's all terrible. It's going to be easier for you to take it away and start again and do it nice and simply.
But what about pages that are not necessarily dynamic at all?
Pages that aren't dynamic?
Yeah. No, but they're not client-side dynamic.
Oh, they're server-side dynamic, and you want to make them client-side dynamic?
No, so
I totally don't understand.
You have some pages.
Yeah.
So you have one page which has a to-do list, and another page is just like a report page, which changes every day, but you don't interact with it. Right?
So you've got two separate pages, and then each a separate page loader.
So you want to make one page use Backbone? Does that make sense?
I don't think so. I think that once you start like separating parts of your web app and having different parts doing different stuff, where theoretically they're under the same your information hierarchy, I think it's weird to start having one page do one thing. So I would say just load in all the HTML from one, and load it in the page loader. Just display the different stuff programmatically with jQuery. Just hide one page and show the other. Update the URL. Because you can load 5 pages in at once. And we tried this, and it's amazing. You can just load all of your pages and then show and hide them accordingly. If they visit a certain URL, you can show one page and hide all the other ones. You can put them all in JavaScript and show them later, so it's SEO friendly. But yeah, load all the pages at once, if you can. Load all the data at once on page load, because it's not going to add a huge amount of data. People are going to say, oh, it's 80 kilobytes more to your initial page load. And it's probably not even 80 kilobytes, it's probably like 20 kilobytes. That's not much. It's not much, and it doesn't take long because the perceived speed is there. So when you're doing it now, you're switching between pages. It's like a second, 40 milliseconds to load the page, but it takes a little time to load the page and do the HTTP request, and you've got all this stupid overhead between your 2 pages. What you want people to be able to do is switch between them like this, like really fast. You want to click something and have it show like in an app. Like apps don't, you know, Mac apps don't sit there and like if you display a preference pane, it doesn't go loading it and then show it. It's just there. And this is what we need to get away from, I think, in HTML. It's just get everything and then show it, you know, show it programmatically and switch between these things. Because that's perceived speed, and that's much more important than real speed. I hope that answers you. Does that answer your question?
Gives me some work to do, yeah.
Okay, we have time for one final question, if there is one.
I can't actually see.
I don't.
Someone up the back, stop being shy.
They're very shy. That's the reason they're at the back. Or
Okay, no more questions. Well,
one
more question, yeah.
So when you use, maybe you touched this and I didn't listen, but when you use Backbone for a public site and you have like, you get a Google result and someone is linked to your site like deep into it,
Yeah.
so then you have to load like all the templates and all the JavaScript. Like the first hit will be very hard for the client if it has nothing crashed.
Yeah.
Have you thought about that? Have you done anything
This
about
is a
that?
problem that Twitter has, right? When you load up a Twitter tweet and they do that hash slash thing, you have to load the entire page first. Then it shows your timeline, and then over the top of that, it shows the tweet because after everything's loaded, it shows the stuff, and that's horrible. Like that's a horrible experience because it takes forever, and you're confused by all the different state switching. Basically, the idea is like be aware of the URL. I mean, Backbone does this for you because, and I think every JavaScript framework does or should. It's aware of the URL from load, and it does that first. So when you load up the page, you're actually pushing in all the data that you need. You also know what the URL is that they're requesting. And if your app is reasonably smart on the server side as well, and this is where it kind of starts to get messy, you can kind of start prioritizing what data gets shown, right? Because you can be a little bit flexible with what you're actually pushing into the app because you're rendering these templates using Rails. I'm probably talking too fast, but yeah, that's something. It's definitely something to be aware of. And you don't want to make it so that the first load for someone, if they click on a deep link, sucks. You don't want that. You want to make it as fast as possible. It's a really, really good point.
And there is also lazy loading code libraries like require.js,
Yeah.
where you can like dynamically, when processing the code, doing the code, actually load other JavaScript code. Other classes.
Do you want to repeat it? Or?
The point was for require.js with lazy loading JavaScript. So you load it as you need, right? So you only load the bits that you desperately need for that first launch first, and then later on you load other stuff. That is one way to do it. I don't know. It depends on the application. It depends on how much stuff you're doing. And if you're doing all that much stuff, it's probably too much. You should simplify it right down. But yeah, I think that's
Yeah, that's it.
all the
That's
time.
perfect.
So thank you very much. I hope that's been educational or at least interesting for you. I think that this stuff is really fun. And if anybody has any questions for me that you didn't want to ask because you're shy, please come up and buy me a drink at the after party and we'll talk.
That always works with Elliott.
Thank you very much.
Give him a big hand.